Hey, what's going on there, folks? Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're at on this New Year's Day. Happy New Year's, by the way. It is the Earthmaster back here on this January 1st, 2024. Gotta get used to saying that here, about 11:59 a.m. California time. Latest activity shows a 3.9 across the area. Looks like just outside of Turkey, and of course, still seeing quite a bit of earthquake activity in the Japan area. Goodness, a lot of movement taking place here yesterday and today. Of course, what a way to start off the new year with a large X flare and also a very large earthquake out here across the west coast of Japan. This earthquake coming in again yesterday, my time, about 11 o'clock or so, just after 11, for a 7.5 earthquake. Goodness, one of the more stronger quakes to see out here along the western coast of Japan. Most of the activity occurs across the subduction zone here to the east and across the eastern coast of Japan. They normally see those large subduction zone quakes. So this was a rather large earthquake, but in a kind of an odd zone here. They do see earthquake activity in this area, but not quite as large as what we had seen. I pulled up historical data here. Most of the larger movement, that 8.0 occurring over here south of Tokyo, across these subduction zones. Of course, we had larger earthquakes here in the years past as well, but specifically around this region that's seen the 7.5 last night. They don't get that big. They normally don't get that large. It looks like a 7.6 way up here, a little bit further on the opposite side of this plate boundary. They've seen that 7.6 back in 1964, but around this area, most of these earthquakes in the mid to upper sixes across the west coast here of Japan. So quite the shaker going on out there for sure. A little bit of data in terms of the summary. All right, the USGS kind of put into view. I was waiting for this last night. It looks like they finally put out a little tectonic summary on what caused this earthquake and the area that it's in. The 7.5 earthquake on the west coast of Japan on the island of Honshu occurred as a result of shallow reverse faulting in the Earth's crust. Focal mechanism solutions for the earthquake indicate faulting occurred on a moderate dipping reverse fault striking to the southwest or to the northeast. Japan obviously is seismically active, with most earthquakes occurring off the east coast, so opposite of what we've seen last night. There in Japan, where the Pacific plate subducts beneath the Japan plate. That's this area right here. Got Japan up here. There's the Pacific plate subducting underneath the area right here, North American plate, and got the Eurasia plate over here. This is kind of just a big scale model. Of course, there's going to be other fault systems around and other smaller areas, but this kind of gives you a good indicator of a broad view, so to speak. Subduction zone right here, where that earthquake struck last night, obviously away from that subduction zone. Shallow earthquakes cause more damage than immediate and deep focus ones, since the energy generated by the shallow event is released closer to the surface. That's why this earthquake was felt so strong and did produce a tsunami. While earthquakes are common in Japan, the region surrounding the earthquake here recently sees lower rates of seismicity as compared to the major subduction zone along its east coast. They do mention about quite a few sixes occurring in this area, which, I showed you guys there on the earthquake map. Sixes are quite common out here in this area. Sevens, not so much. So this is a rather large earthquake, and again, occurring away from this major subduction zone. That right there definitely tells me that this region here is quite strained. Right? You got to have a lot of built-up pressure in this area to create that kind of energy. So we'll continue to watch that. That's just been a lot of earthquake activity here in the region. Let's check out the aftershock activity here so far. Still seeing quite a few fives. In fact, we have a couple fives here in the last hour, 5.1 and a 5.0. Now, to me, it kind of looks like there's a little bit of migration going on here across the area, not specifically staying in one spot. Remember back last year in Turkey, we've seen earthquake activity migrate across this plate boundary here. We've seen several large earthquakes around this region, almost filled in this entire area here across the plate boundary. So we're going to keep an eye on that, see if we get some further migration here to the southwest. Not for sure exactly, how far south the fault system here runs, but definitely looks like it's extending a little bit further south into this area. That could mean that we could see some further larger scale movement out here. But so far, at least 4.0 or 4.1 and above, about 33 earthquakes. Now this is according to the USGS. There's obviously a lot more in the smaller magnitudes there, as we can see the earthquake 3D globe quite cluttered with earthquakes and decent magnitudes as well. The largest magnitude aftershock right now appears to be a 6.2, just about 8 minutes following the 7.5. I was doing the update last night, and we seen that little earthquake come in, the 5.5, and didn't think anything of it. A few minutes later, we get the 7.5, and it didn't quite look as big as a 7.5 on the seismograph station here until after I ended the update. And then I seen some major P waves coming in to all the seismograph stations there. And when we see that, that generally indicates that that was a pretty large earthquake. So either way, it's a crazy way to start off the new year with some large earthquake activity. We'll get to space weather here in a little bit, chat about some more X-flare potential. But there is a Japan station. This station right here, I believe, is located on the eastern coast over here. But it is still picking up quite a bit of earthquake activity, so that's the most recent seismograph station there coming in live. A little bit of activity on Yellowstone National Park as well. We did see some tsunami observations here, seen a couple videos floating around on Twitter as well about, at least according to the Japan Meteorological Agency, the ones that I can see here, there may have been some bigger, maybe some smaller, but according to this area here, they've seen, looks like 120 centimeters, over 120 centimeters, which is just over 3 feet. So that's a decent size tsunami there, localized to this area. Tobishima and other areas here seen a little bit less. But either way, there was definitely a tsunami that was generated there, and the Tsunami Warning Center did pretty good of getting the information out real quick, and so did the local agencies there across Japan, which is good, right? Got to be quick and on top of it should earthquake activity pop up there. Keep the people safe for sure. So we'll continue to watch this area. We haven't really seen any migration of movement away from this zone, aside from that little, the localized migration here to the south. We'll continue to watch that. But as far as any unusual activity following these events regionally, I'm really not seeing it. We do have one earthquake up here in the Kamchatka. That was from yesterday. That area is quiet right now. Mariana Islands from yesterday as well. So all the movement right now striking this area in Japan. And it looks like it's, been building up for a little bit. Of course, all the strain tends to stress this area. It is reinforced by the North American plate, the Eurasia plate up here, all putting the squeeze, so to speak, on this area. Of course, subduction zone in the red arrows. And I'm still watching that, the Kamchatka. I was, I always chat about this subduction zone right here because we have not seen any sufficient large-scale movement on it in quite a while. Of course, that 9-pointer back in 2011 off the coast of Japan was a little bit further south here. But this area, I believe, still is primed for some megaquake activity and above the 7.5 magnitude like we've seen there in Japan. Again, these earthquakes that occur off of the subduction zones don't get quite as big, but they can do, obviously a little bit more damage because of the surface feature, very close to the surface, providing strong shaking, and of course, a subsequent tsunami, maybe not quite as big as what we would see across these major subduction zones, but it did create one there on that plate boundary, or just off of it. So we'll continue to watch that. Did have some activity there in Southern California as well, 4.1 coming in. This activity earlier this morning, so after all this activity in Japan. About 11 kilometers deep for this 4.1, just off the coast here of Long Beach. That's, this California is another area that's long overdue. We could look at this map and probably pinpoint 100 areas that are overdue in terms of, accumulated stress. Should have seen an earthquake by now. Southern California is one of them for sure. So we'll continue to keep an eye on it. It does look like it's moving slightly out here. Inland, a couple smaller earthquakes here in the last hour, some ones. But that 4-pointer, let's see what we got. It was felt over a broad area, of course, highly populated region down here, Los Angeles, and it looks like maybe even down to San Diego felt it as well. So some slight shaking going on there to start off the new year. Not quite as as crazy as that earthquake there in Japan, but we'll continue to watch that. Obviously, Southern California is well overdue. Keep an eye on that. The rest of California up here, some generally small microquake activity. Some movement north here of the Clear Lake volcanic field. Got one earthquake here in the lower lake area. This is away from the hydrothermal plants. About looks like a kilometer or so below the surface, pretty shallow. That is along the coast range here. There's a couple different fault systems that run through here. But it does look like it's somewhat active out here today in terms of smaller movement. Into the Pacific Northwest, not so much. Handful of smaller earthquakes up there in the Mount St. Helens area. This movement around Reno looks like we're still seeing a little bit of activity here today in the new year. Couple ones and some smaller quakes out here in this little swarming area. Got to watch this region as well, because this area is capable of producing, some decent earthquakes here across the area. A 6-pointer or upper 6 like they've had in the past could definitely do some damage out here in this time period that we're living in because of the population and the infrastructure that's built out here, the high-rise casinos and whatnot. 118, let's zoom in a little bit here. About 111 earthquakes specifically in this area of Reno. Don't believe it's volcanic. I do remember hearing something, though, about some older volcanic activity out here. I don't know if it was around this region or not. I'm wanting to think it was around the cemetery out here, but I'm not for sure if this is around the cemetery or not. But that's, it's kind of confined to a small area here, 111 earthquakes. There's obviously some fault systems up here. We see some of the mountain ranges out here. Nothing really shown up here on the USGS map. Looks like maybe a couple around the area, but specifically right where the swarm's occurring, hard to say. But we're still seeing some activity, and this activity occurring before and after that large movement there across the Japan area. So it doesn't look like strain has released much out here. So keep an eye on it. Really haven't heard too much about it there in terms of the news agencies picking up on it. But definitely still swarming out there. Some movement up here in Yellowstone as well to start off the new year. Looks like a 3.3 and a 2.0. Let's go check out Yellowstone here real quick, see what's rocking and shaking up there in this area. Ooh, goodness. There we go. I tell you what, I think this is a sign that 2024 is going to be a very active year in terms of earth science and earthquakes and volcanoes and space weather activity. Look at that. We got ourselves a decent earthquake swarm up here at Yellowstone. There is the... See this earthquake right here? That is not the 3-pointer. That is the 7.5 in Japan. Showed up pretty nicely here across the Yellowstone stations. And that's very common to see these large earthquakes show up around the globe. It just goes to show you how sensitive this equipment can be picking up seismic waves. But that earthquake, P wave coming in. Look at the S waves, these little wavy type lines following the P wave primary signature right there from that 7.5 showing up in Yellowstone. Now, it was not felt in Yellowstone, but it was definitely picked up by this sensitive equipment. Now, the 3-pointer looks like that's somewhere here in the mix of a lot of earthquake activity here. It picked up, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours of some pretty intense earthquake activity here at Yellowstone. That's a lot of activity. And I tell you what, we got 2 earthquakes up here on the map. I guarantee you'd be able to count more than 2 earthquakes in all of these. There's probably a good, I would probably say close to 100 of at least in terms of counting every single one of these spikes. Those are all little earthquakes as well. These earthquakes that are in the darker red lines are probably close to 2.5 or below. Of course, we did have a 3-pointer in there. That 3-pointer occurred, 3.3 occurred at 6:41 local time, my time here. Looks like that's outside Yellowstone Lake, centered roughly, potentially in here somewhere. I'm guessing that thicker red line right there would be the 3.3. So we have at least something right here above 2.5. That may be another 3. And all these other earthquakes here are very close to 2.5 or just slightly below. I'm really surprised that nobody's jumped in on this as far as the USGS goes. But then again, today's a holiday, so they're out of the office. And probably won't hear anything about it until tomorrow. They're still having a little bit of earthquake activity. I'm seeing it showing up there across the Yellowstone, Wyoming station. So we'll keep an eye on it. Space flare or solar flares, large earthquakes, and an earthquake swarm at a supervolcano. Goodness, is this the year that everything goes chaotic and crazy? You never know. Good possibility. Either way, a pretty decent earthquake swarm there across the Yellowstone area. This one here, not quite as active as this other station. Where'd it go here? Right here. This one looks to be the epicenter of all this activity. Even some of these smaller ones are showing up on this one that are not on this station here. But we'll continue to watch that. Obviously, some of the larger quakes will show up distantly across the area as well. There's that 3-pointer. And again, a couple other, at least maybe 2.5 or slightly below. There is earthquake activity in Japan, and it looks like some of those aftershocks were shown up as well. Either way, pretty active out here. And one would never know, right? One would think that there's only 2 earthquakes there on the map, according to the USGS. But it looks like they may have turned off the earthquake activity for this region. We'll see what they put out tomorrow, right? All right, Texas area. Anything rocking and rolling down there? Seen a lot of fireworks out there across Texas on the social media platform here last night. Looks like still seeing a little bit of activity out here around Pecos, Texas, and the oil fields, but nothing major going on out here across the eastern portion of the country for now. The Alaska area, very typical. No major changes up there. A little bit of movement way up north of the Brooks Range. Been noticing a little bit of heightened activity up here way up northern Alaska. But aside from that, very typical movement in that state. Hawaii, right? Got all this movement out west. Not really associated with the Pacific Plate, but kind of in a way it is, right? All the strain builds up in this area. Of course, reinforced here by the Eurasia Plate, the Pacific Plate, North American Plate, putting the crunch on in this area. Doesn't look like any of this movement has affected Hawaii in terms of the volcano activity out here. Kilauea Volcano, we've been watching and reporting on it here for a couple months. The last eruption there back in September of last year now, 2023. Let's go ahead and check out the latest informational statement or see if they got anything unusual going on out here. Update shows that the volcano, as of today, is not erupting. Looks like the seismic swarm that began south of the crater area has ended, but it has been coming and going. It looks like there was a drop in inflation recorded on the Sand Hill tiltmeter station there, along with the lack of earthquake activity. Yeah, it's ended for now, but this swarm does not stay quiet for long. So we do see things come and go. You know, we can't say that it's done, it's over. Right now, it's temporarily over, but, you know, there's still a couple earthquakes out there this morning, so it's not entirely over. Last 7 days does show that area of earthquake activity, mainly across the southwestern rift zone. We were seeing some earthquake activity here across the southeast rift zone as well. But it doesn't look like it's completely ended. It looks like it's definitely tapered off a lot, but we're still seeing a couple earthquakes here in the last 24 hours. So we'll continue to watch that. But either way, it is at its highest level of inflation, even higher than the most recent eruption back in September, and is at its highest level than any time since the 2018 eruption. That was a little bit more spectacular in terms of fissure activity opening up out there away from the summit region. So let's check out the tilt meter, see what we have going on here. And we're back up. We're back up here since about yesterday. Notice that inflation chart here. This is the last 2 days of inflation there at the summit. We're going back up. So we should see things kick back up here in terms of earthquake activity. Right there, that tells me that magma is continuing to build underneath the area. And again, fissure activity could open up at any time, but most likely we will see intense earthquake activity prior to any fissure activity opening up out here. And I'm still kind of leaning towards the southern area of the summit region for fissure activity. I just kind of have an odd feeling we may see some areas around the 1974 eruption event areas that may open up. So we'll continue to watch that. Let's see what else we got here for earthquake activity. Again, all eyes right now focus mainly on Japan. A look at the earthquake 3D globe here shows some minimal movement across the area of the Kermadec Trench in New Zealand. Not really seeing anything shaken too much down there. And of course, the Indonesia Islands area, still seeing a handful of earthquakes in their typical zones. So we'll keep an eye on Japan. There's always a potential likelihood that we could see a decent sized aftershock in that area. I don't think we're going to see anything larger specifically here in this zone because, earthquakes of 7.5 in this area, specifically this area, is kind of rare, right? We've seen it on the history map, the earthquake history map. Over here, oh yeah, above 7.5, 9.0 and greater across these subduction zones. But right now, specifically this area, I don't think we're going to see anything larger specifically in this zone, but always a likelihood of seeing at least another decent size aftershock, potentially up in the upper 6 range. Iceland, what do we got going on way up here? That's from yesterday at 4.4. Let's give a quick glance here at the Iceland activity. That's been a pretty hot topic here in terms of volcanic activity. Doesn't look like they put out an update here in terms of the movement around the Svartsengi area. This was put out a couple days ago. Still kind of chatting about the likelihood of an eruption in this area northeast of Grindavik. A look at the last 12 hours of earthquake activity out here does show somewhat elevated movement, 63 earthquakes in total. And down here across our magma intrusion area near Grindavik, seeing a specific swarm here in the town itself, just underneath the town. So that is obviously a little concerning. No eruption activity yet, obviously since our couple fissures that opened up here last month north of Hagefell, roughly about in this area right here, I believe it was. But still there's a possibility, a likelihood that we may see something else open up around that magma intrusion area, and that includes the town here of Grindavik. And that's where we're seeing a little bit of earthquake activity here today. All right, space weather activity. Goodness, talk about, great way to bring in the new year with fireworks on the ground and fireworks in the sky and earthquakes underground. There's our X flare from yesterday. Strongest flare, X 5.0, in this solar cycle 25. That sunspot region is popping off some further M flare activity. There is an elevated threat here of seeing another X flare. About a 25% chance. I was going to say an X flare of 25, which is possible. Obviously we've seen stronger ones than that, not recently, but they can happen. So the X 5.0, decent sized flare, but not the strongest we can get. That flare was not directed at Earth, but there is a Earth-directed component to it when it comes to the CME that it did produce. Now, it looks like coming up here, let me go back here and double-check that. Looks like potentially G1 class storm occurring on the 2nd. He hasn't updated this yet. These are still off of there, but it looks like potentially on the 2nd we could be seeing some elevated auroras here, maybe even something higher. Let me go check here real quick. The Space Weather Prediction Center, of course, that X-flare produced an R3 radio blackout. Let's see here. Yeah, G1 possible here on the 2nd UTC time. Not for sure exactly the time frame this is going to come in. This is a 1-2 UTC time, January 2nd. So technically, January 2nd here occurs in about 4 hours on the UTC time chart, because right now it's 2024 or 2025, somewhere around there. So it looks like it could occur sometime tonight, maybe in tomorrow. Not for sure exactly which time this is going to come in, but we'll cover that a little bit later on this evening when I get a little bit more information on it. But here's the expected CME impact. Earth in the green here, that green little circle, the sun right here, obviously. There's that massive CME that was produced from that X-flare yesterday. Looks like it does affect us. We're just going to get the extreme edge of it, but it will play a little part in producing up in terms of elevated speed potential here, and plasma density. It looks like it's going to be elevated as well. And of course, all that means is that we could see some auroras at the higher latitudes here. Uncertain on if we're going to see it anything lower, but right now they're forecasting a G1 class storm. So we'll cover that again a little bit later on. There's a couple of those M flares from that same sunspot, 3536. There is a likelihood, again, with this type of activity that we could see another strong X flare at any time. There is the sunspot in question. Doesn't look like much, but it is kind of flaring right now with some C flare activity, C2.4. A look at the magnetogram image here. This is from yesterday. Today's image of 3536 does show quite the complex sunspot region out here. Going to have to watch this pretty closely as it becomes more visible here about the Earth-facing side of the sun. This will be pointing at us, looking at us, and of course anything that does blast off from here could be even more geo-effective if we get some stronger flares from that sunspot region. Fairly complex structure right there. Haven't seen something like that in a little while. Hopefully things will hold up, and maybe we'll get some more flares going on here. So yeah, watch for the auroras. We'll cover that a little bit more later tonight and see when the exact time frame is going to come in. Like I say, it may come in tomorrow during the day for us here in North America, which means we probably won't be able to see it all that much. But yeah, so just stay alert and aware out there. It's getting quite active in terms of solar weather. And numbers, man. There's magic in numbers. The 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 thing that was going on, with 12, 31, 23, right? Last day of 2023. It's just seems like there's always big events taking place around magic numbers or sequence of numbers. Crazy stuff. But just be prepared as we enter into this new year, and just stay safe out there for sure. Let's see what we got for any severe weather. Doesn't look like we're seeing too much severe weather activity. Just some thunderstorm activity out there across portions of the desert southwest today. As far as rainmakers and whatnot go here across the west coast, we have another storm system coming in Tuesday into Wednesday. That's going to stick around for a day or two, followed up by, I think, another storm system, although Oregon's going to get the brunt of this one. This one's kind of bombing out right there, meaning that it's intensifying right before landfall. Pretty decent pressure right there. Looks like just off the coast there of Portland, Oregon. That's going to, bring some change out here because we're looking at a lot of colder air dipping down into the lower 48 as we head into about the middle of January. A lot of snow potential, a lot of what ifs. I could see snow down in Oklahoma, maybe northern Texas. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Looks like maybe the panhandle out there might get a little glimpse of some wintertime precipitation. And then we'll continue to watch this, see how this plays out. But it looks like the first half of January 2024 brings with it some changes, some colder air, and the potential for some snow out there across a good portion of the country. All right, folks, a look at the live seismograph stations out here. Well, things, look a little quiet here. We'll see the bigger earthquakes obviously flatline the majority of these stations if they're super big. But for now, the seismographs look pretty quiet, relatively speaking here. Have a good one. We'll catch you guys back out here a little bit later on this evening. Of course, if anything changes out here, we'll definitely jump back on here. And again, Happy New Year to everyone from me and Missy Mimi's. We'll catch you guys back out here a little bit later tonight. Take care, folks.